When night falls, the darkness starts to speak. Between each breath and the silence, there are whispers no one was meant to hear. This is Night Whispers, where the dark has a story to tell. Many of you have been asking for follow-ups, updates to the stories that left you hanging. Until now, I never had the chance, since most storytellers vanish after sharing their experiences, but this time is different. One anonymous viewer who once sent me a chilling beach story back in July 2024 has finally returned with an update that might change everything you thought you knew. Before we dive into the new details, let's revisit where it all began. The ocean wasn't always a source of fear for me. In fact, it used to be my favorite place in the world. As a kid, the sound of waves meant summer freedom, salt on my skin, and laughter with friends. But what happened one weekend changed that feeling forever. That weekend felt like freedom. No parents, no rules, just 3 teenagers on the edge of adulthood with an entire beach house to ourselves. The air smelled like salt and sunscreen, and the horizon seemed endless. We planned nothing except to live it up, swimming, joking, maybe sneaking in a little trouble. At 16, it felt like the world belonged to us and nothing bad could possibly happen. The road trip itself was half the fun. Riley's new license made him feel like a king behind the wheel, though his driving said otherwise. He jerked the car left and right, swore at every bump, and had Charles and me laughing so hard we could barely breathe. The windows were down, music blasting, the ocean breeze growing stronger with every mile. By the time we reached LBI and unloaded our bags, it already felt like the perfect start to summer. Charles's beach house wasn't huge, but it was built like a maze of summer memories. Every corner felt familiar, the creaky spiral staircase, the salty breeze sneaking in through the sliding door, the upstairs deck where you could see the moon shimmer on the lagoon. It was the kind of place that felt safe and carefree, like nothing bad could ever happen there. Of course, we were about to be proven terribly wrong. The lagoon behind the house gave the whole place this calm, dreamlike energy, gentle ripples catching the sunset, the sound of water lapping at the dock. It should have been peaceful, but for 3 teenage boys it meant something else entirely: opportunity. With no parents around and the night ahead of us, we scrolled through Snapchat, laughing, flirting, and making plans we thought would define the best weekend of our lives. When the girls Rosie, Alexa, and Sophie said they'd come over, it felt like we'd hit the jackpot. The plan was simple: booze, music, and laughter echoing off the lagoon. We were 16, reckless, and thought the world revolved around nights like this. The air smelled like salt and freedom, and as the first bottle opened, none of us had the faintest clue that the night was about to twist into something unforgettable and terrifying. We floated in that little pool like it was our own private paradise, laughter, echoing, smoke curling into the night sky. The water shimmered with reflections of the dock lights, and everything felt suspended in time. For once, there were no parents, no rules, just the rhythm of the waves and our carefree chatter. If happiness had a snapshot, it would have been that moment. At first, we laughed it off, thinking Charles was pulling one of his usual pranks, but his expression didn't match the joke. His eyes were locked unblinking on the far dock. The laughter faded, replaced by an uneasy silence that settled over the pool like fog. I squinted, trying to see what he saw, but all I could make out was a faint silhouette, motionless, watching. The air suddenly felt heavier, the water colder. Something about that figure felt wrong. The girls didn't share my confidence. Their laughter had vanished, replaced by uneasy glances toward the dark water. Even Riley, who never took anything seriously, muttered that maybe they should head inside. Charles kept staring, his voice low and tense as he whispered, "I swear someone's there." The wind picked up, rippling the lagoon's surface, and for the first time I started to doubt myself. At first I thought it might have just been the reflection of water, or maybe a trick of the dim backyard lights, but then the movement became clearer, slow, deliberate, almost synchronized. One of the girls gasped, clutching my arm as shapes started to take form across the lagoon. Riley whispered, "Dude, there's more than one." The air felt heavier suddenly, as if the night itself was holding its breath. For a moment, none of us breathed. The figures didn't move, didn't speak, they just stood there perfectly still, as if studying us. Even from across the lagoon, we could feel their presence. Riley whispered, "They're watching us," and that single sentence sent a shiver down my spine, stronger than the night breeze. The sound was unmistakable, 4 bodies hitting the water in quick succession. Every instinct in me screamed to run, and from the look on everyone's faces, they felt the same. Charles slammed the sliding door shut as we stumbled inside, hearts pounding. The ripples on the dark lagoon reflected faint moonlight, but the figures were already gone beneath the surface. Every second felt like an eternity as we huddled in the dark, listening. The only sounds were our heavy breathing and the distant slosh of water against the dock. No one dared speak. I could feel Charles trembling beside me, clutching his phone, but too afraid to call anyone. Then a faint creak echoed from upstairs, slow, deliberate, like a step on the wooden floor. Every head turned toward the ceiling in terror. Charles's face went pale as the soft thuds crept across the ceiling. Each step sounded slower, heavier, like whoever it was knew exactly where we were hiding. My pulse hammered in my ears. Riley whispered, "We need to go. Now." No one argued. The realization hit all at once. We were trapped, cornered, and unarmed. Then came another sound, a door hinge groaning open upstairs, and that was it. We bolted. When we finally stopped the car, our hands were shaking too much to even dial. The dispatcher's calm voice barely registered over the pounding in my head. After what felt like hours, the police cleared the house and let us return, but walking through that front door again felt unreal. Drawers were emptied, closets ransacked, and the eerie silence made it worse. What once felt like a summer getaway now felt like a crime scene. Charles's dad was furious, pacing the floor while officers took notes. The realization hit us like a punch. Whoever broke in hadn't just stumbled upon the key. They knew where to look. That meant it wasn't random. Someone had planned this, maybe even watched the house beforehand. The police tried to sound reassuring, but their tone said otherwise. We were dealing with professionals. Even now, I can't shake the thought that it had to be someone close, maybe a neighbor, a friend of the family, or even a worker who'd been there before. The break-in was too precise, too confident. It wasn't just luck. Every detail felt calculated from timing to access. The worst part, knowing the thief might have smiled at Charles's parents once, completely unsuspected. Years have passed, but that night still echoes in my head every time I check a lock or hear water ripple outside my window. I swore I'd never talk about it again. Closure seemed impossible. But life has a strange way of reopening old wounds. Recently, something happened that dragged me right back to that summer, and I realized the story wasn't over after all. It feels surreal even saying that out loud, the same house, the same lagoon that still haunts my dreams. What happened there shaped how I see safety, trust, and the unknown. So, before I share what's new, I need to rewind just for a moment to remind you how that terrifying weekend unfolded years ago. The sound of their footsteps upstairs still gives me chills whenever I think about it. We could hear faint creaks and muffled thuds, proof that they were inside. In that moment, every joke and every ounce of bravado vanished. We weren't just a bunch of carefree teens anymore. We were prey trapped in our own safe place, praying those strangers wouldn't find us. For years, that night just became one of those stories we'd tell in disbelief, a nightmare frozen in time. The police stopped calling, and eventually so did we. Life moved on, or at least that's what I told myself. Charles and I drifted apart, each building, new routines, new lives, trying to forget the eerie image of those figures crossing the dark lagoon that still haunted the edges of our memories. At first, I thought it would just be another awkward night of small talk and forced smiles, but fate had other plans. The reunion was held in the same coastal town where it all happened, a detail that already made my stomach turn. Still, curiosity won. Maybe seeing familiar faces would help me put the past to rest. I had no idea that meeting Charles again would reopen every door I thought I'd locked. Charles looked almost exactly how I remembered him, just a little older, a little calmer, but with that same spark in his eyes. Riley cracked a joke the second he saw me, and suddenly it felt like no time had passed at all. The chatter, the laughter, the nostalgia, it all came flooding back. For a moment I forgot why reunions used to make me nervous. I was just glad to see my friends again after all those years. When the reunion finally wound down, Charles and I slipped out into the cool night air, laughing about how half the people there looked twice their age. We found this little dive bar a few blocks away, dim lights, sticky floors, the kind of place where the jukebox never stops. Over a couple of beers, the conversation started, light jobs, relationships, old classmates, but as the night went on, our laughter quieted. Charles's tone shifted, and I could tell he was leading up to something heavier, something he'd been holding on to for years. Leaning in close, lowering his voice like he was about to share a secret. His expression shifted from nostalgic to uneasy. "You're not going to believe this," he said, tapping the edge of his beer glass nervously. The air between us suddenly felt heavier. Whatever memory had just surfaced clearly wasn't something he'd planned to revisit. I remember straightening up, fully alert, as Charles began his story. Charles laughed a little as he said it, but there was no real humor behind it. He explained that Kieran had always been the reckless one, the kind of kid who thought consequences were optional. "You know how we used to push boundaries," Charles said, shaking his head. "Well, Kieran doesn't just push them, he obliterates them." I could already tell the story was about to take a dark turn. Charles paused to take a sip of his drink before continuing, his eyes distant. "You know Carl Island, right? That stretch near the wildlife refuge?" he asked. I nodded vaguely, remembering the restricted area signs. "Yeah, well, that's where they decided to drop anchor," he said with disbelief. "Middle of nowhere, no lights, no permission, just 3 drunk idiots thinking they were invincible." Charles rolled his eyes as he described it clearly, still annoyed at how reckless his brother had been. "They thought it'd be some magical night," he said. "Stars, water, no adults telling them what to do." But as he talked, his tone shifted. "Except that place is pitch black after sunset," he added quietly. "You can't see a thing out there. No lights, no boats, nothing but silence." Charles leaned forward, his voice lowering as the story turned eerie. "At first Kieran thought he was imagining it," he said. "But the more he stared, the more certain he became it was their boat. The nameplate had been scratched off, but the shape, the railings, even a tiny dent on the hull, it all matched. He told his friends right away," Charles continued, "and that's when the stupid curiosity kicked in. They wanted to check it out." Charles sighed, rubbing his temples like he'd told the story 100 times before. "They should have just stayed put," he muttered. "But Kieran's stubborn. Once he gets something in his head, that's it." Ignoring his friend's hesitation, Kieran dove straight into the water, motioning for them to follow. "It was almost pitch black by then," Charles said. "All you could see were their splashes disappearing into the dark." Charles leaned closer as if reliving the moment himself. When they reached the boat, he said Kieran was shaking, part excitement, part fear. He ran his hands along the side like he was touching a ghost. The registration plate was gone, but the faint outline where it had been was still visible. He kept saying, "It's ours. I know it is." But without their phones, there was no way to prove it. Charles shook his head, a mix of disbelief and frustration in his tone. They were panicking, but not for the right reasons, he said. Instead of worrying about the boat or that strange situation, they were scared of getting grounded. Kieran's friend kept insisting they call someone, but Kieran refused. He said his dad finding out would be worse than anything the cops could do, Charles added grimly. "They thought it was a smart shortcut," Charles said with a grim smile. But that's when things went sideways. As Kieran and his friends trudged through the wet sand toward their boat, the night had grown eerily still. No wind, no sound, just the waves, he continued. Then one of them stopped walking and whispered, "Guys, someone's there." Charles said Kieran described the scene like something out of a nightmare. The man didn't shout or say a word, he just started sprinting, Charles recalled. The shovel was dragging at his side, scraping against the sand with this awful, metallic sound. Panic took over. The boys stumbled and shouted to each other, their feet sinking into the shore as they ran. Kieran said he didn't even dare look back again, he just knew that guy was right behind them. Charles said Kieran could barely start the engine because his hands were shaking so badly. They finally got the motor running and began creeping away, he said, but every splash of the propellers sounded deafening in the quiet night. Out on the dark water, their navigation lights glowed like targets. They were terrified the man would notice and chase them. The worst part, Charles added, was that they had to crawl at a snail's pace or risk getting fined or caught. The water felt endless, Charles said. Every ripple sounded like something chasing them. Kieran told him his heart wouldn't stop pounding the entire way back. The boat's slow hum was the only thing breaking the silence. He said he kept glancing over his shoulder, half expecting to see another boat's lights closing in behind them. Charles said Kieran couldn't sleep that night. He kept replaying the sound of that engine in his head, Charles explained. He swore it was faint, but steady, like someone was matching their speed in the dark. Even after reaching home, Kieran couldn't shake the feeling that the other boat had followed them halfway back. His friends begged him to report it, but he refused. He told me straight up Charles said he'd rather deal with nightmares than with his parents finding out he'd stolen the boat and been drinking. Kieran said his dad's anger was like nothing he'd ever seen before. He wasn't just grounded, his phone was taken, his friends were banned from visiting, and the family boat keys were locked away. It wasn't just punishment, Charles said. It was disappointment. That more than anything crushed Kieran. He told Charles later he'd never seen his father so genuinely shaken. Charles shrugged when I pressed him about it. That's what I asked too, he said. The police didn't even bother to follow up. They filed a report and that was it. I couldn't wrap my head around it. The same area, the same lagoon, and possibly the same stolen boat just sitting there years later. You'd think someone would have recognized it, I told him. Charles nodded, sighing. Yeah, man. But the cops treat it like some campfire story not worth their time. Charles said maybe the thief thought no one would dare check a restricted area. If you're hiding in plain sight, pick a place no one's supposed to go, he joked, though there was no humor in his voice. The more we talked, the clearer it became that none of it made sense. Not the timing, not the man with the shovel, not even the location. It was like the whole thing was designed to stay a mystery. Charles said that even though Kieran tried to laugh it off later, he could tell his brother was still shaken. He doesn't go near the lagoon at night anymore, Charles added quietly. I couldn't blame him. The idea of some stranger digging on an isolated island in the dark was enough to haunt anyone. That mystery, combined with the thought of their old boat possibly being involved, left both of us silent for a while. As I drove home that night, the image of those 4 silhouettes by the lagoon replayed in my head over and over. Maybe the truth is still out there, buried somewhere near that island or drifting quietly on the water. I realized that some stories don't end with answers, only echoes. And as much as I wanted closure, part of me knew this one was destined to stay an unsolved summer memory. Thank you for staying until the end. If the dark didn't scare you away, maybe you belong here. Subscribe to Night Whispers and let the darkness find you again next time.